Welcome back to Movies TV Man. I'm Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. And a very warm welcome to the Movies TV Mad Daily. It's not the DCU Daily today because we're talking about Game of Thrones. I want to apologise about the hood. I did it yesterday as well. It's very cold here. It's beautiful and warm outside. But in this large house, it's very damp. It's very difficult for me to do a video, sit here without this hood on. So I apologise. I hope it's not off-putting to you. So I must say that I've become more obsessed with Game of Thrones on rewatch than I ever did on original watch. Now, I watched Game of Thrones as it was broadcast on HBO. Did you know that HBO stands for Home Box Office? So it's cinema on the small screen. Now, on first watch of Game of Thrones, I found it very brutal. I found a lot of the characters very cruel, and it was difficult for me to watch it. But I continued to watch it because I was invested in the story, the characters, the geography of it all. The storytelling was amazing. The acting was amazing, and Arya Stark is my standout favourite character. If I had a daughter, I'd want her to be like Arya Stark, a very impressive young woman as a character, and the actor Maisie Williams is an even more impressive young woman. What a performance. You see, most of the actors on Game of Thrones were giving this deep Shakespearean performance, which was right for the piece. But Maisie was probably the most inexperienced, or one of the most inexperienced cast members on the show. So she gave a very honest performance, which was very important and integral for Arya. I like the comparison between Arya and Sansa. Sansa's this young woman with stars in her eyes. She thinks her SHIT doesn't stink, where Arya realizes that it does. Arya might come from a family of lords and miladies. You know, her father is the Lord of Winterfell. But she doesn't have those airs and graces. She doesn't care about those airs and graces. She doesn't really want to be part of all of that. You know, her father, Ned Stark, has told her she has to get married, have children, be a wife. She's not going to do that no matter what her dad says. She wants to fight like the boys. She has this pent-up aggression. She, you know, when she sees something wrong, when she sees cruelty, she likes to act against it. She's very much everything you'd want in a daughter. And it's an absolute delight to watch Maisie as Arya. It's absolutely fantastic, from seeing her father beheaded, from her interaction with the many-faced godsman as well. And it's interesting, that guy clearly sees something in Arya. He knows that Arya is going to end up wiping out the other girl who's working with the many-faced gods. But it's all a test. So there's that. And I do want to get to the whole season 8 thing, because I do have my own views on that. But I'm not a book reader. You see, Game of Thrones is based on George R.R. Martin's Songs of Ice and Fire. I'm not a book reader. I'm a watcher of scripted entertainment. That's who I've been since I was a little boy. I don't have the concentration to read many books. I do read sometimes. I do read some comics. But yeah, I'd rather sit there watching a movie or a TV show. And obviously it came to a point where the scripture, the book or books, I'm not too sure if it was a bunch of books or one big, thick, fat book, I don't know, ran out. They ran out of stuff to adapt, and that's really, as far as the hardcore Game of Thrones fans, Song of Ice and Fire fans, believe that's when the problems began. Personally, I enjoyed it from beginning to end. And as I say, we will get to the elephant in the room, which is the final series, the series finale. But what I love about Game of Thrones, is analogy to real life. I've been mentioning Game of Thrones in other videos I've been doing recently when we've been talking about the DCU. I think its comparison to Hollywood is amazing. And I know about Hollywood. I know that Hollywood is a dangerous place to be at. They use people, you know. I can't talk about it too much because these platforms won't like me saying what I want to say. But if you watch Game of Thrones, if you watch the cruelty enacted in Game of Thrones, it's not too far away of the cruelty enacted in this business, in this entertainment industry. It's like my father educated me about as a young man. I never believed him. I had stars in my eyes like Arya Stark as well. But, and I think one of the most difficult moments of Game of Thrones to watch is the beheading of Ned Stark. I always found that very difficult, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue to watch the show because you feel for those kids. You feel for the Stark kids. You feel for everything they're about to go through, everything they go through. But it's a brilliant coming of age story. It's a saga. If you notice something about Game of Thrones, it never fades to black, the screen, unless it's the end of the episode. They don't do any kind of fades from one scene to another. It clicks from one to the other. And that's a very interesting thing about Game of Thrones as well. I think it's one of the best franchise ever done. I think it's one of the best stories ever told. I think it's better than Harry Potter and Star Wars. I love Harry Potter and Star Wars, the movies, by the way. Well, not all of them. Obviously, George Lucas's Star Wars, and I like all the Harry Potter movies. I'm not happy they're being rebooted onto streaming. But I think this is one of the greatest stories ever told. And George R.R. Martin has created something amazing. I haven't read the book or books or whatever, but the show. Now, basically, it's interesting if we look at the guys who created the TV show, who adapted it. It's David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. That's right, I nearly forgot the names. That's them. Now, they're the ones with the best pitch. So they were given, George R.R. Martin was very strict on who was going to get this gig. Now, the point with Dan and Dave was they had a great idea to adapt George's world, George's stories, George's characters. And while there was scripture to adapt onto the screen, it was fine. They did a fabulous job. But I want to put you in the minds of Dan and Dave once you ran out of books or a book, whatever it was, right? Run out of stuff to adapt. All of a sudden, you've got nothing. Now, they were working with George R.R. Martin, so George had an idea how his story ends, but probably as a writer, being a writer myself, you don't have it all in your head if you haven't written it down, if you haven't finished that story, and you change your mind, So I can really sympathize, with David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. 1 minute they're adapting it brilliantly, and then they've got nothing more to adapt. And for them, it would have been very problematic. And they really lost their careers because of season 8, because of the series finale of Game of Thrones. Let's look at the series finale. I'm okay with a lot of the stuff and how it ended up. The only thing I was disappointed about, I would have liked to have seen Daenerys and Cersei go at it kind of, person to person. Either have more dialogue or go at it properly, physically. Not that really Cersei was a physical character. She was more of someone who spewed out poisonous dialogue. When you look at Daenerys, it's very interesting. She's someone who, was born, after her father was killed, and she grows up and she becomes this compassionate person, but with the murder of her brother, you can see that she believes in an eye for an eye. You see, unlike the Mad King in season 8, I don't think that Daenerys has become mad. I think she's become too vengeful. She doesn't really want to give Cersei the opportunity to give in. She wants to kill Cersei for everything she's done. I don't agree with that plane of thinking, but I can see where she's coming from. So I think and I kind of understand what happened to Daenerys in the end. A lot of people were angry about that as well. One of the pinnacle situations about the Game of Thrones series finale is that Jon Snow refused becoming king. And I can't remember exactly. It was a while back since, I'm rewatching the end of season 6, the last 2 episodes later today. Can't wait to be doing. Now, by the way, I never skip the intro of Game of Thrones. Anyone who does that should be dragged through the streets and pelted with vegetables and fruit, I'm telling you. But anyway, yeah. So I actually get Jon Snow not wanting to be king. because he's not a king. He doesn't want a crown. He doesn't want titles. He was never comfortable with that type of leadership. It actually makes sense that he doesn't become king. Now, if I remember rightly, it's Bran who becomes the king. Am I correct? And a lot of people were angry about Bran, but it actually, again, made sense of Bran being the king. It all made sense to me. So a lot of people were angry. And look, if you're a die-hard reader of A Song of Ice and Fire, I'm not going to argue with you because you know a lot more about this huge universe than I do. I only saw the scripted television form, right? I only watched the TV show, which was amazing. It was amazing. I mean, the production values, the budget, the international cast, the sound stages, the set design, the locations, the music, the performances. Look, it's one of the most amazing, most beautiful things I have ever seen. And it really is an event doing this rewatch. And it is very emotional to rewatch it. And when you watch it, you realize how crap streaming originals are today. Even with people not enjoying season 7, I can't remember how people felt about series 6. On the rewatch, it looks perfectly fine to me. There's a lot of time wasting, of course. Daenerys is kind of taken back a bit, and she comes back again to where Tyrion is. But yeah, there's a lot of time wasting. Game of Thrones had to waste a lot of time, but like all TV shows, they did it very, very creatively. Well, not all TV shows, but it's a work of art. It's something special. But going back to season 8, I was thinking about this over breakfast this morning. Maybe it would have been better if the show ended when they ran out of scripture, books or whatever to adapt. Once they had nothing more to adapt, maybe they should have ended the show. There's a problem with that, because if you're going to wait for him to write more and bring it back again, then the actors are going to age and it's going to be a problem. But when you look at the situation, he still hasn't finished the work. And a lot of people are quite cruel to George about that. Look, it's up to him. It's his life. If he can't be bothered to finish it, or he doesn't want to do it quickly, it's up to him. I can't demand anything of a writer. That's down to the people who need to sell his stuff. That really isn't my problem. But I think once the book's finished, the show should have finished. And I think the show should have finished like the last book or whatever, or part of the story, the last piece that he wrote. I think that's how I would have done it. And I would have said that's our climax. How the last written stuff was finished, that's how we're going to finish the show. I think that would have been better, to stop the show once there was nothing else to adapt. But they actually wanted to finish the story. They wanted to give the audience satisfaction. The problem is, a lot of the audience weren't satisfied. And there was a lot of aggressive takes about Game of Thrones at the end of the day. But although I'm a fan, I'm also a creative, and I can see it from both sides. And if you think about the hugeness of that production and what Benioff and Weiss achieved with that show, having to lead that thing, having to deliver those episodes every week, was no mean feat. What they created was something utterly special, and I don't blame them too much, and I don't think it's as much of a disaster as people say. It's obviously the Starbucks cup in picture isn't good. I also think by the end of it, they just wanted to get it done and get it finished, because making that show is incredibly difficult. It had to be. It must have been such a challenge. You're making a movie a week. It is a movie a week. And now we've got House of Dragons. Now, I don't believe House of Dragons is Game of Thrones. It's not the same. It doesn't have the same peak. It's still a good show. It's still made with the same craft and talent. But this is the problem with prequels. We know what happens to the Targaryens. We know about the Mad King. We don't really need to see it in a prequel. For me, prequels don't work. But for me, Game of Thrones was something utterly unique and special.